Are you part of a nonprofit organization or youth group looking to raise cash for your cause? Stay tuned at the end of this video to learn how you can bring the action and excitement of the Millennium Wrestling Federation to your town live, featuring the superstars and legends of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Folks, welcome to another installment of Conversations with Dr. Dave. I am Dan Marotti, joined by the man of the hour himself. We call him El Presidente in the Millennium Wrestling Federation, but the work he does for the community in general with his work outside of wrestling, his passion in life, Dr. David Reiss.
Thank you. Thank you. Just to introduce myself, I've been a psychiatrist for way too long, 30-something years, and I've been involved with sports, non-sports, trauma, grief, PTSD, and wherever I can be of some help right now, I'm willing to lend my time.
Well, hopefully there won't be too much grief and sadness watching us, but that's a different story for a different time. Dr. Reiss, back on July the 29th here in the world of professional wrestling, we lost not one, not two, but three well-versed wrestling personalities, the WWE Hall of Famer Nikolai Volkov, a Grandmaster Sexay, Brian Lawler, the son of WWE Hall of Famer Jerry the King Lawler. Brian, in fact, was one of the headliners of the very first MWF Live event back in September of 2001. And we also lost journeyman wrestler Brickhouse Brown, who had a degree of fame down south in the territory days, all in one day. And you had this remarkable post on Facebook. And I said, I think we need to bring that Facebook post to life almost. And here you are, back here at the studio. We sent the helicopter for you, and here you are, my friend.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, it's been a difficult time, and obviously, you know, that was one day that really hit the wrestling community and fans. But grief and loss is something we deal with all the time, and don't always deal with very well. You know, sometimes there are public outpourings of grief, but in terms of actually dealing with it personally and individually, everybody's different. No two people should go through this, expect to go through the same thing. But as a society, we don't do it very well, and it causes a lot of problems.
Wrestling, it has been a problem for a long, long time now, all of these premature deaths. You had varying degrees of it on July the 29th. Nikolai was a 70-year-old man, not exactly a young guy, but still someone that could have had a greater life expectancy. Brian Lawler, I believe, was in his mid-40s. He had some substance abuse problems, amongst other things, and Brickhouse Brown passed away from cancer. Three very different forms of the ending of life. But in wrestling, it's well known, all the substance abuse problems that have led to various forms of death. The steroid issue has caused so many young deaths with the heart attacks. And for the life of me, I'll never understand how people dismiss people that have heavily abused steroids for years, leading to a heart that is decimated by the time they pass away. And they say, well, it was a heart attack he died from, not steroid abuse. But I'm sure we could really go into that conversation. But wrestling, it's tough when we lose these people. For the fans, they become almost a friend that you see on television every week. For those that work in the industry, it can be a mind-blowing experience, especially when it's someone you're so close to who unexpectedly leaves the universe so untimely.
Yeah, and of course there are different reactions depending on the circumstances. And both in the sports world, in the entertainment world, we're seeing a lot of people leaving before their time.
Right.
And I can't give you statistics, was it worse before, was it not worse before? But we know we have an epidemic of substance abuse and opiates. I know what I'm seeing personally, and of course I'm seeing people who are coming in for help, but is an amazing amount of people coming in who have lost family members or significant of others to substance abuse or complications of substance abuse. But of course that doesn't stop normal tragedies, whether it be illness, accident. As you say, like in this situation, some illnesses which we understand and we just can't do a lot about necessarily, some which strike suddenly, maybe at a young age, maybe at a premature age, maybe not a premature age. You can say someone's lived a full life, but that doesn't change the fact that there's loss and there's grief involved.
Absolutely. Doesn't make a difference what the age is. Some, it can be more somber than others when you have a young guy like Brian Lawler. But anytime you lose anyone at any age,
right,
when all of a sudden they're gone from your life permanently like that, it has ramifications.
Everybody reacts. And what I generally say is that suffering, grieving comes naturally. Children grieve even before they have words to it. You can say we even think some animals grieve. So it's not like you have to learn how to suffer. But on the other hand, you do have to learn how to mourn and get past it. Mm-hmm. And someone could argue, well, what about children or even animals that do get past it on their own? True, but they didn't go through a society which for years taught them to suppress what they're feeling. So in a sense, part of learning how to mourn as an adult or as a young adult is unlearning what we were taught as to how to avoid mourning. Otherwise, you can be stuck in suffering forever as opposed to mourning where it doesn't do away with the loss. But the example I like to give is it changes an open infected wound to a scar. And the scar may at times be unsightly, it may be uncomfortable. In some ways it actually may be stronger than what was there before. But having a healed scar is still different from having an open wound that's open to infection. And that's what happens when you don't go through a mourning process. Not that everybody goes through the same process by any means, but if you don't go through some process of healing to get to that scarred stage, not to make it go away, but to get to the safer scarred stage, you're very vulnerable.
Well, we talked about it before we went on the air, I should say. Some fans found it remarkable that Jerry Lawler went on to compete in a wrestling match, I think just a day or two after Brian, his services took place. Now, you can understand that far better than I can from a psychological point of view. From the passion and the life that is professional wrestling, I can understand that being therapeutic, but from a medical point of view, maybe you can provide greater insight than I can.
Just in full disclosure, I've met Jerry a couple of times, but I can't say I know him in any personal way. So this is not talking about him at all.
This is general, right?
This is very general. Different people find strength in different types of ways of dealing with things. Now, actually, I saw the picture of, I think he wrestled
James Ellsworth.
James L. And I saw a very emotional picture of the two of them embracing after the match. And, for some people, it may be very difficult to conceive of how someone can do that, which is true. And many people couldn't. And for many people, it wouldn't be the right thing to do because it does mean putting things aside. And it means, especially something like wrestling, but even if you're talking about going back to work in a clerical position, having the concentration, having your skill set and concentration intact enough to perform safely and effectively. Now, for some people, that's a way of coming to terms with it, especially as you say, in a community, whether it be the wrestling community or any other community. It's a way of connecting with people. It's a way of sharing the loss. Mm-hmm. And you'll hear a lot of people do that also say, well, it's what my father, son, mother would have wanted me to do. I think the important thing is not to either praise or detract from the person who does that, because if that's right for them, that's right for them.
Yeah.
The important thing is not to feel pressured to do that. Mm-hmm. That we hold people who do that up, and more power to them. If that's the way they get comfort, that's really great. And there's nothing wrong with it, it's healing. On the other hand, if you're not that type of person, and honestly most of us aren't, it takes a special type of person to be able to do that. To feel pressured to do that can really get in the way of grieving. So I don't know Jerry personally, and in no way am I criticizing him for doing it. It may have been the best possible thing he could have done. But we shouldn't feel pressured that if we suffer a loss, that we're going to be able to perform the next day, even if it's basic tasks. Because there's a normal level of distractedness, there's a normal level of just sadness, and on the average, and no one person is average, most people are not going to be able to function very well for a while. Many societies and religions, and I'm not talking about any specific faith, will designate a period of time that may go from days to a week to 30 days or sometimes even a year.
Wow.
Where a person is not expected to function well after a serious loss. Now that also may not fit everyone, but it shows a respect for needing to go through a process that everyone goes through differently.
Do you think that in the United States at least, where work seems to take over all-encompassing in people's lives a lot of the time, you get 3 days, then you got to go back in, or you have to use your own time. There's almost that stress and pressure almost from the onset of when you're trying to figure out what to do after you learn the news on how to process it, how many days, and so on and so forth. Have you seen reactions to that?
Yes, and most of the time it's negative. For some people that works. For some people it's useful to get back into functioning as quickly as possible. But on the average, it's terrible because it doesn't give you time to face your feelings. It doesn't give you time to get support. And especially when we talk about some of the, I don't want to say corporate because it's not really corporate. It's more just the structured work situation where you're expected to, and you sometimes have to even hand in proof of a loss.
Isn't that
That's
crazy?
insulting.
It sure is.
And it not only gets in the way of grieving, but it fosters even more anger, which is part of the most difficult part of dealing with grief, is acknowledging the anger. And just expecting someone to take 3 days and pull it together is just totally unrealistic for what we know about the human mind and human emotions.
Deal with the death, wake, funeral, go back to work.
Right. It just doesn't make sense. And then if the person's expected to perform up to standards, that's just not realistic. Now, everybody's different. Some people may fluctuate. They may be able to perform well for a while, but then have a day or a week where they're not up to par. And that's not pathological. It's not something that should be medicated or treated. That is normal grieving. So our society in general does not do grief. We do vengeance. We do getting angry. And at times when there's a national tragedy, there's an outpouring of grief.
A community in and of itself.
Yes.
The whole country.
Whole country often, and
or even the globe sometimes, depending upon how big.
Correct,
yeah.
correct. Whether it be a musician, whether it be someone in entertainment, whether it be like the Challenger disaster. But when there's a national disaster, there's an outpouring of grief. But even that, it usually, after a day or two, goes away. So it's really a very superficial grief, and what happens is all the stored up grief that so many people have not processed sort of is allowed to pour out in a way that isn't fake, because it's real grief, but it's not really about the national tragedy where maybe they were really pretty distant, they didn't really know that person. It's just a allowance to let it out, but then have to cap it back up. So we get these huge outpourings of grief and these ceremonies, but a lot of times it's really a distraction. It doesn't really help.
Look at now in a day and age when you have so many terrorist attacks and school shootings and things like that, and it encompasses maybe an hour or two of news time on social media and the cable television channels, and then it's on to the next story. And I mean, I can remember the first few shootings. I remember I think there was one when I was in high school in the late 90s.
Columbine.
And now, I don't think you could probably recite the last 3 to 5 off the top of your head. They happen so frequently.
Yeah, it's very
anybody.
Yeah, it's very selective what we'll decide, and it's not us that decides. It's sort of the media or the social media. It's not a conscious decision, but there's a decision made about what we should pay attention to.
Right.
Because for every tragedy that gets the attention of the media, there are how many that don't? That may be more or less significant, and are surely more significant to the people involved.
Absolutely.
So I'm not saying we shouldn't react to that, because that is a way to release emotions, but to have that as the only way really distorts the whole process.
In your time, in your tenure, in helping so many thousands of people in your career, have you seen any wrong, bad forms of grief? Is there such a thing?
Yes, there is. Three things I'll talk about. One is suppression, which is just not acknowledging that you're grieving, making believe everything's fine, or making believe I'm strong, I can deal with it. It's life. We all have emotions, and if we don't, we're in trouble. And I don't think I have to go into that in detail. Obviously, if you suppress your feelings, it's going to come out somewhere else. The other thing about grief that can be very dangerous, which I sort of implied, is if we let it turn into anger or vengeance. Anger is a normal part of grief, and the anger doesn't have to be rational. It may be even at the person for leaving you. It may be at the doctor who didn't save them. It may be legitimately at someone who caused an accident. But anger is a normal part of it that we have to come to terms with. And if we don't look that anger in the eye and find a way to deal with it in an adaptive way, it turns into a wish for vengeance or a wish for revenge. And that can be very dangerous and can get focused in directions where it doesn't belong. The other thing that interferes with grief is substance abuse, even alcohol. And that's not saying someone shouldn't drink anything or have, a glass of wine or something. Mm-hmm. But if you're using alcohol to numb the grief, you're basically delaying it. And you're making it harder for your mind to process it. If you want, I'll just tell one very quick personal story.
Absolutely. Share your story, then I know I get the signal we're going to take a time out. Then I have a few tidbits maybe I'll add to it. But please, take the floor.
This is, brief, but I mean, I'm not one who drinks a lot. That's just never been my thing, whatever. But back, and this goes back 30-odd years, an ex-roommate of mine passed away suddenly. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't seen him for a while. We had maintained some contact, and I still really don't know what happened. It just so happened that, this was someone from college, that a third friend who was very close with both of us happened to be in San Diego at the same time visiting. And we had plans to go to Vegas. And then we found out that this man passed away. And we decided we're going to go because that's what Rick would want us to do. And maybe it would have been, I don't know, that was pretty stupid of us, but we were younger. And I can't say I drank a lot, I never drank a lot, but I drank more than I usually do. Mm. And I think that's why it took me probably 6 or 8 months to deal with his death, even though he wasn't that close to me, but just I really interfered with my feeling it. I got into this weird state where it didn't sort of matter, but it was still there, and it really delayed processing it. Now, people who then will continue drinking or using other drugs, no matter what the drug is, even if it's a prescribed drug, if it suppresses really looking in the eye of that grief, it's going to cause more problems in the end, or at least more suffering, even if it doesn't lead to more serious problems.
All right, wrestling fans of any genre, and especially those that may be finding this particular topic online on social media, Dr. David Reiss, I'm Dan Moratti. We're going to take a brief time out, and we'll be back with more conversations with Dr. Dave. Stand by.
Have you ever thought about just how much time it takes to plan every detail of your wedding day? Many brides are now spending 10 to 15 hours each week planning the perfect day. It's like adding a part-time job to your already busy life. Not everyone can afford to hire a full-time wedding planner to help with every detail, which is why so many brides are now turning to a wedding day coordinator. That's right, a wedding day coordinator saves you money, and more importantly, it gives you the peace of mind that your special day will run smoothly. From finalizing all of the details you've worked so hard on to coordinating with vendors, KL Wedding Coordinators will be there every step of the way to guide you through the day and allow you to savor the memories that'll last a lifetime. For more information, visit facebook.com/KL Wedding Coordinators or give them a call, 603-320-2752.
I think WrestleMania 1 is what got Vince McMahon started. That's it. The buildup of that, everything about it, the timing, everything worked together. Even their enemies, Ted Turner, were helping us because every other word they would say something about WWF. I mean, the thing you do is don't say nothing about your enemy.
Right.
They didn't. So they made us even better.
Yep.
They cut their own throat. No, I don't think, whatever her name is, Cyndi Lauper and all those people in that, all it did is give it that little glitter, but did it help? They come out there to see a show, buddy, and they got it.
They're ready.
ready to take their rightful place amongst the literary greats. Who, you ask?
The New Day!
That's who. It's the Book of Booty. Shake it, love it, never be it. It's the feel-good story of the rise of the New Day. Loaded with games, trivia, coloring pages, and so much more. The Book of Booty. Shake it, love it, never be it. Available now online or wherever books are sold.
Folks, welcome back to Conversations with Dr. Dave. I'm Dan Marotti, joined by the man, the myth, the legend himself, Dr. David Reiss. Doctor, thank you for joining us tonight.
Glad to be here.
We're talking about mourning and grief. July 29th, we lost three superstars in the world of professional wrestling: WWE Hall of Famer Nikolai Volkov, Grandmaster Sexay, who headlined, was one of the co-headliners of the first MWF Live event back in 2001, along with Brickhouse Brown, a well-tenured veteran of many of the territories down south. We were talking about three areas of problematic grieving, so to speak. I wanted to share a couple with you, Dr. Reiss. And they're kind of wrestling-related stories, so the folks that find us through our wrestling social media may find it of interest. When it comes to the suppression part, I remember back in March of 2013, we were preparing for our big event of the year before you came on board, Soul Survivor 9. In 5 days before that event, out of nowhere, we learned that Paul Bearer died, our former president, a man that had been part of the organization for 10 years at that point, someone that did so much for everyone, from the youngest athletes trying to break in to productions here at the studio, to his involvement in the company that people didn't know about even when he was with WWE during certain returns, and the daily conversations that went on online and via telephone, not so much on the phone, but definitely via email, just about every single day. And that you talk about being unable to grieve. Dr. Reiss, we had Soul Survivor 9 on that Saturday, the day the man was put in the ground. So obviously, I was not able to attend his services. I would have liked to have. But you're responsible for a locker room of 30 people. You're responsible for 20, 30 event staff members, television production crew, the people that do the merchandise, the people that do the Autograph Photo Fan Fest, the people that do the food, interacting with the Wicked Witch that runs the venue, interacting with the police detail that we have to rent. Plus, hundreds of wrestling fans to make sure that everything goes precisely to plan to give everybody the best experience humanly possible. And, it was almost a surreal experience. There was no time to process anything because we were so busy in the moment. And as much as I would have liked to have gone to Mobile, Alabama for those services, I knew an ex-Pac, a good friend of mine that you know quite well, he agreed with me. We almost held a service of our own before the event began. We did a nice 10-bell salute, and the roster came out onto the stage. But, that's difficult. I'll tell you this, I don't think I truly forgave myself until I went to his grave WrestleMania week this year when we were down in New Orleans, because that's about as close to Mobile, Alabama as I was going to get. The day after WrestleMania, we drove, was about 2 hours there and 2 hours back, but we found the plot. So I felt a little bit more at ease after that, if that makes any sense. But that's 5 years.
Yes, it definitely makes sense, and that brings up a very good issue. Because like we were talking before about ways of grieving, and whether you're talking about grief and mourning, or whether something I talk to people about in therapy all the time, is life gets in the way of the best therapy. So we can know, even in terms of grieving, we know what we should do, and everybody's different. But sometimes reality gets in the way that you just can't do it. And yes, that has a cost, but the important thing is to realize that cost, and as soon as you can, to step back, and you can't go back and redo it, but to take care of yourself and realize that you were stuffing something that shouldn't have been stuffed, but you had to. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, some type of ritual, whether it be religious, whether it be faith-based, whether it be just among a community, is helpful in that regard. Mm-hmm. That, yes, you couldn't be at the funeral, to acknowledge you're sad about it, to acknowledge that as much as you were devoted to the people that you were performing for, if I could use that term, that there may be some resentment towards them, which is absolutely normal. Even if they don't deserve it, it's absolutely normal to feel it. And then step back and process that. Let yourself feel sad, let yourself feel angry, realize that it's worse because you did have some burden on you, and then try to take those feelings into a positive way. Now, that doesn't mean immediately doing good for others or immediately forgiving. Some people can do that, and more power to them. And you see, even when there's a tragedy, that some parents or whatever will come out the next day and say, I forgive them. Well, that may be absolutely sincere. And there are some people who just function that way and can do it. For most of us, that's really pushing everything aside. So it's really a matter of afterwards coming back and looking at that in the eye, and whether it's a personal ritual, whether it's just sitting watching films of the person, looking at pictures, whether it's just with close friends, or whether it's a more community or faith-based, going through some ritual to acknowledge the pain. If you don't acknowledge the pain, and let's use the example of a physical injury. If you fall and you have a cut, and you don't acknowledge that you're in pain, you're not going to clean that cut out.
Right.
And you're at more risk of getting infected. So you want to acknowledge that pain and tend to it. Not overly so, but appropriately so. And sometimes you can't do it right away, and that does, in the short run, make it worse, unavoidable. But to then, when you can, step back, like, if you would have been able to have some personal ceremony sooner than 5 years, that might have been more helpful. Mm-hmm. But we don't take the time to do that. We're not trained to do that. We're trained, okay, it's past, go on. And that's not good.
All right, I'm going to throw another one at you, Dr. Reiss, from the personal files. As you know, back in 2004, I was in a bad accident. I found out dear Junior Ambassador Devon Brent was coming into the world, so I kind of pushed myself the next year to try and get myself into working condition. August 4th, 2005, I was hired by, we'll just call them one of the largest media companies in the world, for a nice job as a commercial account executive. The next day, August the 5th, 2005, we had an MWF Live event fundraiser at a church in Blackstone, Massachusetts. It was Iron Sheik Appreciation Night in honor of his Hall of Fame induction when I went out with him to California earlier in 2005 for that. And the story is known. It was in the Boston Globe. It was in some of the wrestling magazines. On the way home that night, myself, Commissioner Brad Von Johnson, the commissioner of the time in the MWF, a great help to us over the years, and the Hall of Famer himself, the Iron Sheik, were in a Ford Explorer SUV going on 495 North, and it was like we were hit by a bomb. A kid a year younger than me or so, I was 24, so he would have been 23, fell asleep at the wheel and went across 4 lanes of highway traffic at almost 100 miles an hour. I'll never forget the sound. I didn't see it because we were looking straight ahead and got hit on the side. I remember as I turned my head, the pickup truck was in midair, and then it blew up once it hit the ground. And luckily, if Commissioner Von Johnson wasn't able to hit the brakes as the truck in front of us rolled and rolled and rolled into an inferno, we would have driven into him and blew up. I remember the first thought was, we got hit on the gas tank. We got to get out. And I opened the door, and I didn't realize where I was. I fell into the gully through the glass and all that. And I just remember looking up and feeling the heat from the fire, and seeing on the ground shoes. And one thing I remember vividly was a little teddy bear that was laying, that must have fallen out of the guy's truck. And I tell you, Dr. Reiss, it curtailed my quote-unquote comeback in life to go back to the work world outside of professional wrestling. It took me 2.5 years to wind up starting that job. I had to go through 3 hours a week, 6 hours a day for 8 months of physical therapy with my good friends at Spalding Rehab in Medford, who do a great job trying to get Humpty Dumpty going again. But as you also know, as time went on, I began to develop the CRPS, complex regional pain syndrome, and that has decimated my physical existence most of the time. That's a long story to get into, but I tell you this, you talk about thoughts of vengeance and anger. I absolutely hate the guy that did this to us. He took 3 people that were minding their own business, going to get some Chinese food after a wrestling show. The Iron Sheik can't even leave his house now. He walks on the bottom of his ankle instead of his foot. Commissioner Von Johnson suffered some physical issues that bothered him for a while. And again, I've been plagued with the CRPS now for many years. And the pain that goes along with that is excruciating, and the stress that goes along with that, and the crazy thoughts that go along with it during a flare-up. We could probably do a whole episode on CRPS, but that's not the point here. It's just the resentment I still have towards this person, Dr. Reiss. And I almost felt bad for a while. I said, here's a guy a year younger than me. He went out and probably had, I don't know the whole story, but had fun with his friends, had a few too many, and what happened, happened. I'm sure he didn't wake up that day and said, you know what, I'm going to try and kill the Iron Sheik and Commissioner Von Johnson and Dan Marotti. He made a mistake. But when it came time for the legal ramifications, if you saw what his lawyer tried to get him out of and what the ultimate sentence was, it was pennies on the dollar compared to the reality that I had to suffer through and the other two gentlemen. And I tell you, I still resent that. So what's wrong with me, Doc? I'm trying to get a free session out of you.
Okay, well, you're talking actually about a couple of different issues,
Okay.
all of which are important.
Okay.
One is the grief itself of what happened. You're also really talking about the combination of grief and PTSD. You know, we talk about PTSD and we think about sort of military, but it doesn't always take the same form. And there's sure, you can have a painful memory which really isn't PTSD. That's just a painful memory. But on the other hand, when a memory intrudes, or when you experience it as if it's happening again, that is a PTSD, and it may be different for different people. And one way of looking at that is that when you're in that situation, the body, the mind goes into a flight or fight response. It's automatic. It's how we're wired. And part of that is shutting down the parts of mental functioning and physical functioning that are not necessary when you have to flee or fight. Part of the shutting down is processing memory. Part of it is even the immune system tends to shut down a bit because, you know, if you're in a situation like that, you're really not worried about whether you have the sniffles.
Right.
And your
right.
body literally shuts down some of the immune system because that's not as important. But what happens is the memories don't get processed. If we use a computer analogy, and it's not exact, but it's an analogy. If I asked you what you had for dinner last night, you may or may not remember. I mean, which is no big deal if you do or you don't. But let's say you had some chicken and you could, oh, I had some chicken. You're not going to feel like you're tasting it or it's in front of you. If I ask you, tell me about the odor of chicken or tell me about what spice, you could sort of open that file and tell me that information. But you would have to intentionally go into that, and I'm using it metaphorically, that file in your mind to bring back that experience. And that's because normal memory takes an experience, decides how important it is, and in a sense puts it either in an easily accessible file or distant file. So it's there somewhere, but it's not open. It's a closed file you can call on. When you're in a traumatic situation, the brain does not take the time to do that. So everything stays in what's almost an eternal present. So that it would be as if I said the word dinner, and it wasn't just you thought, oh, did I have chicken or did I have spaghetti or pasta? You immediately start smelling it, tasting it, have all the experience, and of course, since it's traumatic, all the negative experiences.
Right.
And that may happen every time, or it might happen intermittently. And that is PTSD, which really requires a process of reprocessing those memories, to using the computer analogy, putting them back in the right file instead of them hanging out as a ghost in your open memory. The other issue you deal with is the anger. And you know, you talked about crazy feelings. No, those aren't crazy feelings. Those are absolutely normal feelings. You should have those feelings. The worst thing someone can tell you is to forgive the person. Now, when I use the word forgiveness, and people define it different ways, what I mean is tell the person that you don't care that it happened or that you're willing to accept them as a friend. That may not even be appropriate. What is important is to acknowledge the anger and to let go of the need for vengeance, because that will drive you crazy or to something dangerous, maybe towards someone who doesn't even deserve it, or even if it's towards a person who deserves it in a way that's not good for either one of you. And if I have the time, I'll use one
Sure,
quick
absolutely, absolutely.
There was just a tragic situation that was in the news, and I know no details of the individuals, of George Bush I's cardiologist who was murdered. This was
I
a couple
didn't hear anything
couple
about
of
that.
weeks ago.
No.
And it came out that the person who murdered him was someone this was a cardiologist, had treated his mother who died. And 20 years later, he went out and killed this doctor.
Really?
This is just
Wow,
a few weeks
what a
ago.
story. I didn't hear anything about it, Dr.
So
Reiss.
this person's rage, and I know nothing about the individuals, was sitting, seething for 20 years, never dealt with.
Sat there.
And then who knows what triggered the person acting at that time. And obviously, it took the life, even if the cardiologist made a mistake, obviously that wasn't the right thing to do. And I have no idea if the man made a mistake at all. And the person who did it ended up suiciding after he hit it. So it was a total tragic follow-up, because whatever anger was there initially, and it may have been totally appropriate, it may have been reasonable, but not reasonable, and that's a normal emotion, but not appropriate in that the doctor may not have done anything wrong. Instead of being processed, instead of leading to what can I do with these feelings that's productive, was shut down and turned into this burning vengeance, which at some point in time, for reasons we'll never know since the person killed themselves, exploded into another tragedy, which can just set the ball rolling again for someone else.
Wow. I tell you, Dr. Reiss, I wish we had more time to continue on this road, but before we go, maybe the closing question should be, you've heard some stories from me, you've shared some anecdotes from situations you've encountered. What should someone maybe on the bubble, what kind of resources should they look for help?
To be in pain in a situation of loss is normal and doesn't necessarily need treatment. Mm-hmm. To look for comforting, whether it be through friends, faith, whatever, is perfectly appropriate. In terms of when you need professional help, it's really pretty simple. If it's disrupting your functioning. Now, after a loss, you shouldn't expect to function perfectly for a week or two, but for a month later, you're not sleeping, you're not eating, finding it difficult to concentrate, having problems in your personal relationship. If the grief is disrupting with getting back to normal functioning, or of course if it's leading to anything serious like substance abuse, suicidal feelings, violence feelings, then you need help, professional help. Otherwise, look for comforting in whatever way is appropriate to you, but it's really not a psychiatric issue unless it starts disrupting functioning.
All right, folks, you heard it from the man himself, Dr. David Reiss. If you want more David Reiss, there's some good news. SummerSlam weekend, you're going to be with us on a very special full-length episode of Memories and Legends when we'll be joined by WWE Hall of Famer Tony Atlas. He certainly made the news recently when he shared some personal footage from his different thoughts of abuse. And Dr. Reiss and Tony are going to kind of talk it out a little bit. It's a very interesting episode we've already taped. Again, I look forward to the next episode of Conversations with Dr. Dave. It's been a while since we've done one.
Right. Look forward to it, and I really want to thank you and the Federation for giving me the platform and the time to share this. And if it helps one person,
there you go.
It's well worth it.
Absolutely. All right, for the president himself, Dr. Reiss, I'm Dan Marotti. Until we speak again, folks, you and yours, be well. I'm Dan Marotti.
And I'm John Cena Sr.
Let us tell you how the action and excitement of the Millennium Wrestling Federation can help raise cash for your nonprofit cause. Experience the action and excitement of the Millennium Wrestling Federation live in your city, throughout New England, the tri-state area, down through the Carolinas, out to our friends in the Midwest and beyond.
If your nonprofit organization is looking for an interactive turnkey experience while putting enough fun into fundraising, you've met the perfect tag team partner to work with every step of the way.
The MWF offers a variety of packages for groups of almost any size, from our live events at the Boston Garden, the Kowloon Entertainment Dining Complex, and the legendary Suffolk Downs, to high school gyms and function halls. We've presented live events everywhere and anywhere.
Since 2001, the MWF's mission has been simple: keep the kids off the streets. Under the leadership of President David Reiss, we bring the superstars of yesterday, today, and tomorrow to your town. Not for a wrestling show, but an event that features action-packed in-ring wrestling, autograph, pose photo opportunities, Q&A sessions, and so much more. It's the best of sports and entertainment. The week of your event, we can add on to the endeavor with anti-bullying campaigns, library meet and greet reads, youth sport concussion seminars, and more.
Our live events are fit for fans of any age from 5 to 95. This fall is part of our new Kids Club program, We offer live event experiences exclusively for the youngest of fans. On the flip side, we can produce a tailor-made event for fans of an older demographic as well. We work with you every step of the way to get the word out to fans near and far on our local television offerings and to over 50,000 fans and growing on our social media platforms.
Your success is our success. If your group has had enough of candy bar and wrapping paper sales and has the energy to team with our passionate fan base, bringing the NWF experience to your community is the answer to put smiles on faces while raising cash for your cause.
Contact us today to get the ball rolling for your custom-made event that you'll want to bring back year after year to your community.
Don't just take it from us. Here are the folks we've teamed up with in the past.